I wasn't searching for love when Matthew Carter appeared in my life, but the way he carried himself made it impossible to look away. He was steady where I was uncertain, calm where I was flustered, and somehow, without trying, he became the anchor I didn't know I needed. Back then, I had just graduated and landed my first real job in downtown Cleveland. I was still figuring out how to keep my head above water in the corporate world. He was already established, a little older, the type of man coworkers turned to when everything started spinning out of control. Matthew wasn't flashy. He didn't compete for attention the way some men did. But when I was fumbling with systems or trying to decode procedures that seemed written in another language, he was there, patient, clear, never condescending. Those small gestures built into something larger. Before I knew it, we were sharing coffee breaks that lingered, walking together after work, and eventually moving into a rhythm that felt like more than friendship. I loved how his humor only surfaced when his guard was down, sharp, clever, and unexpectedly playful. We bonded over the same things, songs that told stories, late-night drives with no destination, and the joy of cooking together in our tiny apartment. That space was hardly impressive, but it became ours. Alive with Friday takeout, Sunday pancakes, and spontaneous weekend getaways to wherever the road led. We never divided chores with labels. If he got home first, Matthew cooked, sometimes daring himself into strange new recipes. If I was free, I'd fold laundry or plan our next adventure. Our friends often said we seemed so natural, like two people who had been waiting their whole lives to meet. And honestly, I believed them. But there was one detail about him I could never ignore. Matthew never drank. Not a beer at a barbecue, not a glass of wine at a wedding. If someone asked, he'd smile and say, "I've been boxing since I was 7. My body doesn't handle alcohol well. Truth is, I can't stand the smell. He never made it dramatic, just matter of fact. And while others shrugged it off, I admired it. To me, it spoke of discipline, of self-control, traits I respected deeply. Life with him felt seamless, almost effortless. Yet even in those perfect days, I could sense it. That silence behind his smile, the part of himself he wasn't ready to share. It was such an ordinary moment, pie on the table, small talk flowing, when my mother's voice shifted the air in the room. Between bites of her apple pie, she looked at Matthew with warmth in her eyes and asked the one question I hadn't realized I'd been avoiding. "So Matthew, tell us a little about your family." "Claire hasn't said much. We'd love to know more." The words were simple, but I saw what no one else did. Matthew froze, just for a second, so quick that anyone else might have missed it, but not me. His smile faltered, then returned, polished and practiced. "Oh, they're in another part of Ohio," he said lightly. "Not much to tell?" We don't see each other often, and just like that, he redirected the conversation, asking my father about logistics, disarming everyone with his charm. My parents exchanged a glance, curiosity, not suspicion, but curiosity sharp enough to leave me unsettled. Because in that moment, I realized something I'd never let myself think before. For all the love Matthew had given me, there were pieces of him I didn't know. It wasn't just the absence of detail that unnerved me. It was the way he deflected, as though whole rooms of his life were locked behind closed doors. The evening ended warmly, handshakes, thank yous helping me into my coat. But the ride home told a different story. The silence stretched longer than the highway ahead. I stared out the window, replaying his hesitation, wondering what truth hid behind it. He had given me everything I could ask for. his time, his kindness, his love. Yet behind that steady smile was a silence I couldn't shake. That silence followed me into the weeks ahead, lingering like a shadow. And when talk of weddings began to fill my parents' house, I could already feel the quiet tug of tension waiting to surface again. My mother lit up at the thought of me walking down the aisle in white, flowers on either side, every guest rising to watch. My father pretended not to care, but I caught the soft smile on his face when she mentioned champagne toasts and first dances. For them, a wedding wasn't just a ceremony, it was tradition, family, and proof of the life they'd built for me. Matthew, though, saw it differently. One evening over takeout and the hum of our old radiator, he spoke carefully. "What would you think about keeping the wedding small? Just us, maybe a few close friends. A courthouse ceremony and dinner afterward. No limos, no banquet halls, none of that." I tilted my head, caught off guard. Modest, yes, I'd always pictured something simple, but not this. "Small, sure," I said, "but no reception at all?" He shrugged, casual. "Why spend money feeding 100 people we hardly know? That money could go toward a honeymoon or a down payment on a house, something real." Part of me admired the practicality. It even felt romantic in its way. But when I told my parents, my mother nearly dropped her fork. "No reception? Absolutely not. Claire, you deserve a proper wedding. We've been waiting for this day since you were born. If we have to pay for it ourselves, we will." My father nodded in quiet agreement. "It's not just about you two, sweetheart. It's about family, too, about honoring the commitment you're making." I stood between them, between the sparkle in my mother's eyes and the determined tone of my father's voice, and the calm practicality of the man I loved. And for the first time, I felt the pull of two worlds colliding. The following weekend, I thought I'd try again. Folding laundry side by side, the moment felt safe enough to bring it up. "My parents really want a bigger wedding," I said softly. "They're even willing to pay. It's important to them." Matthew's hands stilled mid-fold. A t-shirt caught between his fingers. He set it down slowly, then exhaled as if bracing himself. "Claire, my parents won't be there." The words hit me like a stone. I blinked, startled. "What do you mean? You haven't even told them the date yet." "I don't need to," he said, turning his face away. "They won't come." "That's just how it is." I pressed, trying to make sense of it. "But this is your wedding too. Don't you want your family there? Your mom, your dad, someone?" He shook his head, jaw tight. "It's not possible. They're busy, just leave it at that." The explanation was paper thin, barely even an excuse. It wasn't that they couldn't come. Life threw obstacles at everyone. It was the way he shut the door so firmly on the subject, refusing even a sliver of detail, as if his family was a wound too deep to touch. I tried to smile, tried to let it go, but later that night, lying awake beside him, I couldn't. Matthew had given me every reason to trust him, his patience, his kindness, his loyalty. Yet this silence gnawed at me. Weddings weren't just signatures on paper. They were about two families coming together. Why was he so determined to keep his side hidden in the shadows? I told myself not to push, that he'd open up when he was ready. But as the days passed, the questions kept returning, soft yet insistent, like water seeping through cracks in a wall. Why had I never met his family? Why did he never call them, never even mention their names? What was he hiding behind that calm, steady face? For the first time since moving in together, I wondered if I truly knew the man I planned to marry. The thought unsettled me, simmering in my mind long after his words had faded. And then came the business trip. Matthew mentioned it casually, as if it were nothing unusual. His job sometimes sent him to other Ohio towns, and this would be one of those trips. He even asked if I wanted to come along. I shook my head, claiming deadlines and paperwork. He accepted my answer easily, kissed my forehead, and left before dawn with a small overnight bag. I stood at the window, watching the taxi taillights disappear into the dark, my heart pounding with a decision I'd already made. That evening, while tidying up, I found what I'd been looking for, or maybe what I'd been afraid of. In the glove compartment of his car, tucked between insurance papers and old receipts, was a folded envelope, addressed to Carol Carter, Youngstown. My breath caught. Carol. He had slipped that name once before, too quickly, as though by accident. Now it was here, printed in ink, undeniable. I held the envelope in my hands far longer than I should have, my chest tight with guilt. It felt like trespassing, like crossing a line I had promised myself I wouldn't cross. But there it was, the link to the family he refused to speak of. I slipped the paper into my purse. The next morning, I packed a small bag, told my parents I had errands outside Cleveland, and set my GPS toward Youngstown. The highway stretched out before me, flat and endless. The winter sun glared pale and cold against the windshield. Mile by mile, the world around me began to shift, the neat edges of Cleveland's suburbs giving way to the grayer silence of Ohio's Rust Belt. Empty warehouses loomed, windows shattered. Old factories, once pulsing with steel and life, sat abandoned, their smokestacks stabbing the sky like broken fingers. And the closer I came to Youngstown, the heavier it felt. Rows of houses sagged against each other, porches collapsing, windows boarded shut. Whole streets looked drained of life, like the blood had left them years ago. This was the world Matthew had buried, the world he had worked so hard to keep me from. And now, for the first time, I was walking straight into it. The deeper I drove into Youngstown, the more it felt like I had crossed a border into another life, one Matthew had buried, one he never wanted me to see. The streets were lined with decay. A liquor store flickered on the corner, its neon sign buzzing even in daylight. Across from it, a half-shuttered diner sagged beneath a faded awning, like the building itself had given up. My grip on the wheel tightened. I had grown up where lawns were trimmed, neighbors waved across driveways, and silence meant peace. Here, silence was heavy, broken only by the bark of a stray dog or the bass of passing cars. The GPS pulled me off the main road into a narrow street where the asphalt was cracked with potholes. Fences leaned and splintered, and yards grew wild. A rusted pickup sat on blocks, its tires missing. Laundry flapped stiffly on a line, so faded it was almost colorless. My chest tightened. This was the world Matthew had left behind. His refusal to drink, his clipped responses about family, his insistence that they wouldn't come to the wedding, all of it began to fall into place. I parked near a corner store with a sagging roof and a hand-painted sign. For a moment, I couldn't move. I sat there staring at the address on the paper, guilt twisting in my stomach. I loved him. I trusted him. But I couldn't marry a man built on shadows. So I started the engine again and pushed deeper into the neighborhood. Each turn pulled me further into abandonment. Houses leaned like weary old men. A rusted tricycle lay overturned in a yard, choked with weeds, and somewhere in the distance, a dog howled long and mournful. By the time I found the crooked number on a cracked mailbox, Carter, my heartbeat was pounding in my ears. I pulled to the curb, shut off the engine, and just sat there. The house sagged under its own weight. The porch was littered with beer cans, the curtains yellowed and stiff. My breath fogged as I stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, the cold air biting at my cheeks. Whatever Matthew had buried here, I was about to face it alone. The porch groaned beneath me. The smell hit first, stale beer, sour liquor, and something acidic that clung to the boards. My hand hovered at the door, ready to retreat, but I forced myself to knock. At first, nothing. Only the muffled drone of a television. I knocked again, louder. A low, irritable voice barked back. The door cracked open. A woman stood there, older than her years, her hair matted, her face blotched and red. Her bathrobe was stained, hanging off her thin shoulders. In one hand, a bottle of cheap vodka dangled loosely. She squinted at me with suspicion. "What? If you're from the electric company, I told you I don't have it. Shut it off. No TV, no fridge. Doesn't matter." Her words slurred together. My pulse raced. I'm looking for Carol Carter." "You found her." Her gaze sharpened, scanning me up and down. She crossed her arms, the robe shifting. "Who are you?" "What do you want?" I opened my mouth, fumbling for an answer. But before I could speak, a voice rang out from deeper inside the house. "Mom, leave her alone. She's not the power company." A girl stepped into view, thin, maybe 12, with dark blonde hair tied back in a messy ponytail. Her eyes stopped me cold, green, sharp, unflinching. Carol snapped, "Go back to your room, Lily." But the girl didn't move. She squared her shoulders, glaring at her mother with a defiance far too old for her age. "You're just going to try to take her money like you always do." "Shut your mouth." Carol lunged, swaying on her feet, vodka sloshing. And in that split second, I realized the truth wasn't hidden in Matthew's silence anymore. It was spilling out right in front of me. The fight between Carol and Lily exploded in front of me, words so sharp they cut through the air like glass. "You sold my jacket for booze. You sold the new boots Matthew bought me. You'd sell the phone, too, if I let you. That's why he doesn't come here anymore." My stomach dropped. Hearing his name spoken with such raw anger, such hurt, it rattled me in a way I wasn't prepared for. Carol's face twisted, shame and rage battling across her features. "Don't you talk about your brother like you know him. You don't know what he's done for this family. You don't know what I've had to do." Lily's hands clenched at her sides, her small chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. "You've done nothing but drink. Daniel's gone, and Matthew hates this place because of you. And when I grow up, I'm leaving too." Her voice cracked, but her eyes didn't flinch. Fierce, determined, older than her years. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind spinning. I had come searching for answers, and here they were, ugly, raw, spilling out like open wounds. Carol's gaze snapped back to me, as if remembering the stranger on her porch. Her expression hardened. "You, whoever you are, you don't belong here. Get off my property." My pulse thundered. Part of me wanted to run, to race back to the safety of my car and erase this whole afternoon. But then I looked at Lily, those green eyes. Fierce, yes, but behind them a flicker of desperation. A silent plea she never voiced. "I'm sorry," I whispered, stepping back. "I didn't mean to intrude." Carol slammed the door, the sound rattling through the thin, brittle walls. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. I stood there, breath clouding in the fading light, my heart pounding as if it wanted to claw its way out of my chest. Through a cracked window, I caught a glimpse of Lily retreating down the hallway. Her shoulders tense, her small frame braced against chaos. She had no choice but to survive. One thing was certain. Whatever Matthew had buried, whatever silence he had built between his past and his present, it was darker than I had imagined. The door had barely closed when Lily bolted out the side of the house, her sneakers pounding the cracked sidewalk. For a moment I stood frozen. Then instinct pulled me forward. I couldn't leave her alone, not after what I'd just seen. "Lily, wait!" I called, my voice catching in the cold air. She didn't stop. She darted between two leaning houses, small and fast, a shadow I couldn't afford to lose. My boots crunched against gravel and broken glass as I chased her, my heart racing. Not just from the run, but from the fear that if I let her slip away now, I'd lose the only key to Matthew's truth. After several blocks, the street opened into a clearing. An old convenience store squatted on the corner, its windows grimy, its sign faded to near nothing. Beyond it, a dirt path led toward a pale glint of water. I spotted Lily heading that way, shoulders stiff, hands shoved into her pockets. I ducked into the store first, the bell above the door giving a weak jingle. Inside smelled of dust and age. Shelves sagged with canned soup, cereal boxes, and a cooler buzzing with soda and cheap beer. I grabbed cookies, jerky, and a few lollipops, paid the weary-eyed cashier, and stepped back into the cold. Lily stood at the edge of the path, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "Why are you following me?" I lifted the bag. "I thought you might want something to eat. That's all." For a moment, she didn't move. Then, with a shrug that tried to look careless but carried the weight of exhaustion, she turned toward the lake. "Fine, but I'm not going back home right now." I followed. The path led us to a small lake, ringed by bare trees and jagged rocks. The water was still, reflecting the washed-out sky. Lily sat on a fallen log, knees pulled to her chest. I sat a few feet away, setting the bag between us. "Here," I said softly. "Take whatever you like." She eyed the cookies, then reached for one, chewing slowly. After a moment, she took a lollipop, rolling it between her fingers. Silence stretched, broken only by the soft lapping of water. I didn't rush. I knew better than to push. Finally, Lily spoke. Her voice was smaller now, stripped of defiance. "You're not from around here." "I can tell. Why did you come?" The truth pressed against my chest. I know your brother, Matthew." Her head snapped up, eyes wide, then narrowing with suspicion. "You're lying." "I'm not," I said quickly. "I'm engaged to him." "We're supposed to get married soon." She stared for a long moment, then her shoulders lowered. "So that's why he showed up." Her gaze drifted to the water, voice hardening. "He doesn't talk about us, does he?" I shook my head gently. "No, he never has. That's why I came. I wanted to understand." Lily gave a sharp laugh, empty, humorless. "Of course he doesn't. Why would he? This place, my mom, it's nothing he'd want you to see." I stayed quiet, letting her words come. She picked at the lollipop wrapper, her voice steady now. "Matthew used to come home a lot, back when Daniel was still alive. He tried to help, tried to fix things, but Mom, she was always drinking, selling whatever she could for booze, jackets, shoes, even my school supplies. He stopped bringing stuff because she'd just traded away. He hated it here, hated her, but he loved us, especially Daniel. The name Daniel hung in the cold air like a stone dropped into deep water. And I knew this was only the beginning of the truth I had come searching for. Lily's throat tightened as she spoke, and I felt my own heart seize in response. The truth was pressing at the edges of her voice. Truth I wasn't sure I was ready to bear. Daniel was different, she whispered. He was strong. He always protected me, even from Mom's boyfriends. But one night, one of them came after her with a knife. Her words fell heavy, broken, unfinished. She stared out at the lake as though the water itself might swallow the memory for her. Daniel stepped in, she said finally, and then silence. Her small shoulders trembled, but her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. He didn't make it. My chest ached. I wanted to reach across the space between us, to place a hand on her shoulder, to offer comfort. But I didn't. She wasn't telling me this for sympathy. She was telling it because no one else had listened. That's why Matthew doesn't come back, Lily said suddenly, turning those green eyes on me. He blames himself. He thinks if he'd been here, Daniel would still be alive. But he couldn't save him. He couldn't save any of us. The wind off the lake carried the faint, bitter smell of smoke, making the scene feel even heavier, as though the air itself was remembering. I swallowed hard. In that moment, I understood. The silence Matthew carried wasn't pride or secrecy. It was grief, raw and suffocating. I pulled my coat tighter, though it did little to stop the chill seeping into my bones. Lily sat hunched forward, elbows on her knees, staring at the water, as though her stories could only escape if her eyes stayed locked on something steady. There were 4 of us, she began again, her voice flat but edged with a bitterness no 12-year-old should carry. Sarah's the oldest. She got married before she finished high school. She's got kids now, a couple, maybe more. We don't see her much. Then there's Matthew, then Daniel. He was only a year younger than Matthew, and then me. My breath caught. I could picture Matthew as the protective older brother. But Daniel, his name hung in the air like a ghost. Sarah's always been a mess, Lily continued. Married a guy who drinks almost as much as Mom. They fight, make up, fight again. Sometimes the cops come. Social services showed up once. Almost took her kids. She straightened up just long enough to keep them, but it never sticks. That's just who she is. She tore a loose thread from her jeans, flicking it away like it had never mattered. Matthew left as soon as he could. Went to community college in Cleveland, started working, tried to make a life. He'd come back on weekends, bring food, clothes. He always worried about me and Daniel. He'd yell at Mom, try to make her stop drinking. But she never did. She just waited until he was gone and started again. I forced myself to keep my face calm, though inside my stomach twisted. Daniel was different, Lily whispered again. He stayed. He tried to hold it together, especially when Matthew wasn't here. He protected me, even from Mom. And he really believed, he could save her. Her voice cracked. I stayed quiet, holding the silence for her. One winter, a couple of years ago, Mom was with this guy, Tony. He was mean. Always drunk, always angry. One night, he came at her with a knife. I don't even know what started it. Something stupid. Daniel jumped in, tried to stop him, tried to protect her. Her words broke into fragments, each one jagged. He got stabbed before anyone could do anything. The blow of her words left me breathless. My hand covered my mouth. By the time the ambulance came, it was too late, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Daniel bled out on the floor. Matthew wasn't here that weekend. A snowstorm kept him away. He said later if he'd been here, Daniel wouldn't have died. At the funeral, he screamed at Mom, told her she killed him, and maybe she did. If she hadn't let Tony into our lives, Daniel would still be alive. My throat burned with tears. I could almost see it. The cramped living room, the knife flashing, Daniel collapsing while his little sister watched helpless. Matthew never came back after that, Lily said. Not really. He came once to pack his things, made sure I had what I needed, opened a bank account for me, put money in when he could, but he never stepped inside the house again. He told Mom if she brought another man around, he'd call the cops, and everyone believed him. Nobody around here messes with Matthew anymore, but he still won't come back. Finally, Lily turned to me. Her eyes were wet but hard, daring me to doubt her. That's why he doesn't drink. That's why he never talks about us. He hates alcohol, hates what it does, hates her, and he blames himself every single day for Daniel. My chest ached so sharply it almost hurt to breathe. I wanted to pull her into my arms, to tell her it wasn't Matthew's fault, that no one could have changed that night. But I understood now. His silence wasn't just secrecy, it was a wound. Every glass of liquor, every drunken laugh in a crowd, it wasn't harmless to him. It was blood on the floor. It was Daniel's ghost. It was grief so deep he couldn't name it. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The lake shimmered dull and gray, the sun sinking low. I thought about Matthew, the man who laughed when I burned pancakes, who folded laundry without complaint, who kissed my hand as though it was second nature. And now I saw what he carried beneath it all, a grief worn like a second skin. It wasn't shame that kept him silent, it was pain. And finally, I understood. The silence that had once unsettled me now made devastating sense. But with the truth came another question. If Matthew had buried this so deeply, what would happen when he realized I had uncovered it? Lily's voice replayed in my head, steady yet scarred, every word pressing like a bruise that would never fade. A mother consumed by bottles, a brother buried too young, and Matthew caught in the wreckage, clutching guilt that was never his to bear. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. For years, I'd wondered about his silence, his refusal to touch alcohol, the way his walls went up whenever family was mentioned. Now I knew. Every sip of whiskey, every can of beer, it wasn't just a reminder. It dragged him back to that night, to Daniel, to blood on the floor. His abstinence wasn't about discipline, it was survival. The Cleveland skyline rose ahead, the buildings etched against a fading sky. Home, familiar. But my chest ached with contradictions. I loved him more deeply than ever, knowing now the strength it had taken for him to build this new life. And yet, I couldn't forget the girl I'd left behind. Lily, fierce green eyes, brittle courage, still stuck in that collapsing house, still fighting a war she didn't choose. By the time I stepped into my parents' home, the smell of roast chicken and potatoes should have comforted me. But it didn't. Patricia noticed the shadow in my eyes right away. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" she asked, her hand brushing mine. I shook my head. "Nothing you can fix, Mom. I've been thinking about the wedding." George looked up. Fork paused. "Changed your mind about the big party already?" His tone was light, but there was an edge. I drew a breath. "Yes, I don't want the banquet halls or the limos. What I want is simple, just Matthew, me, and the people who matter most. And that means Lily should be there. The room went quiet. Patricia frowned. Lily? She's his little sister, I explained, my voice trembling. I met her. She deserves better than the life she's stuck in. She deserves to see her brother start fresh, to know she hasn't been forgotten. George leaned back, arms folded. Emily, we don't even know this girl. I've never been more sure of anything, I cut in, firmer than I expected. I looked between them, at the faces that had always been my anchors. You gave me everything: stability, safety, love. Lily has none of that. If Matthew and I are starting a new life, I want her to be part of it, not left behind. Patricia glanced at George. Her eyes softened. You really care about her? Tears burned hot behind mine. She's just a child, Mom. She's had to grow up too fast. Matthew won't admit it, but he's been keeping her afloat from a distance. And I can't marry him pretending she doesn't exist. Our wedding should be about love and family, and she is his family. Silence lingered. Then Patricia reached for my hand, squeezing. If this is what you want, we'll support you. George sighed, shaking his head. Though I saw it, no anger, just resignation, and the faintest trace of pride. All right, no grand wedding. If bringing her in makes you happy, then that's what we'll do. Relief washed through me, fragile but real. For the first time since Youngstown, I felt a sliver of hope. The road ahead would be complicated. Matthew's pain wouldn't vanish, and Lily's world couldn't be fixed with one gesture. But I knew this: love wasn't only joy, it was carrying burdens together, refusing to look away from those who needed you most. That night, lying awake in my childhood room, I pictured it. Not a hall filled with chandeliers and endless guest lists, but a small circle of people who mattered. Matthew steady at my side. Lily there, shy but present. A wedding where the past no longer defined them. For the first time, I felt peace, not because the questions were gone, but because I finally had the answers. Loop. But as spring edged closer, restlessness grew. Each time I looked at Matthew, his steady hands pouring coffee, his calm voice mapping out our future, I saw shadows in his eyes. And I carried Lily's words inside me like a secret too heavy to keep much longer. That night at the kitchen table, I knew there was no turning back. My hands were clasped tight, knuckles white, but my voice came steady. Matthew, I said softly, I need to tell you something. He looked up, distracted at first, then weary when he caught the strain in my voice. What is it? I went to Youngstown. The words landed between us like stones, his face drained of color, his mouth parting in shock. You what? His chair screeched against the floor as he pushed back. Claire, why would you? How could you? I met Lily. The name froze him. His hand trembled against the edge of the table. His voice dropped, sharp with panic. You shouldn't have gone there. You don't know what that place is like, what she's been through, what I've been trying to protect you from. You weren't supposed to see any of it. I reached across the table, brushing his arm. I do know now. I saw the house. I saw Carol. And I talked to Lily. She's just a child, Matthew. She needs you. She needs to know she's not forgotten. He recoiled as if my touch burned him, breathing fast, eyes dark and frantic. You don't understand. That world is toxic. It destroys everything it touches. I promised myself I'd never drag you into it. My voice steadied, calm against his storm. I understand more than you think. I know about Daniel, Lily told me. The name struck him like a blow. His jaw clenched, his body stiff. Then slowly he sank back into his chair and buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with the weight of memories he had kept locked away. "I should have been there," he whispered hoarsely. "If I hadn't stayed in Cleveland that weekend, if I'd just pushed through the storm, Daniel would still be alive. He wouldn't have had to fight alone." I failed him, Claire. I failed my brother. Tears blurred my vision, but my voice didn't waver. "It wasn't your fault. You couldn't have stopped that night. No one could. You didn't fail him, Matthew. You were just a kid yourself. You've carried this guilt for years, but it was never yours to bear." He shook his head violently. "You don't know what it's like. The blood, the screaming. My mother too drunk to realize what had happened until it was too late. I told myself I'd never go back, that cutting it off was the only way to survive." I leaned closer, resting my hand gently over his clenched fists. "Survival isn't enough. Lily is still there. She looks up to you. She loves you. And whether you like it or not, she's part of our life now. When we get married, I want her there. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, because she is your family, our family." He lifted his eyes, raw and red-rimmed. "You really mean that?" "I do," I whispered. "We can't change the past, but we can change the future, for her, for us, for Daniel's memory. Don't you think he would want that?" He swallowed hard, trembling, every word cracking. Open the wall he had spent years building. Finally he nodded. His voice was barely audible. Yes, he would. The silence that followed wasn't heavy with secrets anymore. For the first time, Matthew let his pain be seen, and I held it with him. In that moment, the wedding stopped being about tradition or spectacle. It became about redemption, about building a family not defined by the brokenness of the past, but by the choice to stand together in the present. On a bright Saturday morning in late spring, Matthew and I stood at the Mahoning County Courthouse. No chandeliers, no sweeping aisle, just sunlight streaming through tall windows, pooling across polished floors, and the soft hum of a clerk preparing papers. My dress was cream, brushing my knees, elegant in its simplicity. Matthew stood beside me in a navy suit, his hands trembling slightly, but his posture steady. When the judge asked us to join hands, I felt the quiet strength in his grip. The strength of a man who had walked through darkness and chosen to stay. The ceremony was brief, a handful of vows, signatures on paper, and suddenly we were husband and wife. Patricia dabbed her eyes with a tissue. George cleared his throat gruffly, hiding emotion behind formality. A couple of Matthew's friends clapped warmly, but the moment that stayed with me was Lily. Dressed in a borrowed floral dress and new sandals I'd bought her days before, she stepped forward shyly. She looked small, almost fragile, but her eyes glowed with pride. "You look beautiful," she whispered, before throwing her arms around her brother. Matthew bent down, pulling her into his arms, his face buried in her hair. And for the first time in years, he let himself believe that family didn't always have to mean pain. As I watched them, I realized our vows weren't just promises to each other. They were a promise to her, too. A promise that the cycle of silence and grief ended here. After the courthouse, we didn't head to a ballroom or a banquet hall. We walked to a small diner down the street instead, of vinyl booths, chrome stools, the smell of bacon and coffee hanging in the air. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt right. We crowded into a corner booth, laughter spilling out louder than the clatter of plates. Pancakes, omelets, burgers, comfort food stacked high like we hadn't eaten in days. My best friend snapped photos on her phone, capturing moments more honest than any polished portrait. Matthew cutting a slice of cake with Lily grinning beside him. Patricia teaching her how to swirl cream into her coffee. George leaning back with a rare, unguarded smile, his eyes soft as he watched me glow with happiness. The waitress eventually caught on. When she realized it was a wedding party, she came back with a slice of pie. "Congratulations," scrawled across it in chocolate syrup, refusing to take a dime for it. The table cheered as Matthew and I shared a forkful. No champagne flutes, no chandeliers, but sweeter than anything I'd imagined. When the plates were cleared, Matthew stood, clearing his throat. His voice shook as he looked around the table. "I know this isn't the kind of wedding people expect, but for me, it's more than I could have asked for. For years, I thought I didn't deserve this. Peace, love, a family that believes in me. Today proves I was wrong. And having Lily here..." His voice broke. He reached for her hand. "It means everything." She squeezed back, her chin trembling though she held her head high. "I'm glad you didn't forget me," she whispered, just loud enough for us to hear. Later, as coats were gathered and hugs exchanged, Matthew pulled me aside. He held a small envelope, legal papers tucked inside. "I already spoke to a lawyer," he said, his voice steady this time. "I want to start the process of becoming Lily's guardian. CPS will need to evaluate. There'll be hearings, but I don't want her in that house one day longer than she has to be." Tears blurred my vision. I touched his cheek, smiling through the rush of emotion swelling in my chest. "We'll do it together. She's ours now, our family." We stepped into the golden light of late afternoon. Lily walked between us, gripping both our hands like she was afraid to let go. For years, Matthew had carried guilt every time he thought of family. Now, with her on one side and me on the other, he carried something new. Hope. Our apartment, once quiet and perfectly arranged, filled with the sounds of a 12-year-old adjusting to a new world. Lily's laughter echoed down the hallway when she found rollerblades at a thrift shop I'd taken her to. Her school books spread across the kitchen table at night, mingling with Matthew's work files and my lesson plans. At first, she moved carefully, like she was afraid the welcome might wear thin. But each day we reminded her she belonged. We cooked together, shared stories at dinner, built new traditions. I helped with homework. Matthew took her to the boxing gym, showing her how to throw a proper punch. Slowly, the haunted look in her eyes began to fade. It wasn't simple. Within weeks, Matthew was juggling calls with lawyers and social workers, home visits, background checks, reference letters, proof of steady income, every detail picked apart. One night, after a long call with our lawyer, he sank onto the couch, rubbing his face. "It feels like they're measuring every inch of me, waiting for me to fail." I leaned against him. "They're not waiting for you to fail. They're making sure she's safe, and she is. Because of you, you've already been taking care of her in every way that matters." And she was right. At the first hearing, the judge saw it too. Matthew's clean record, his steady job, the support of my family. Carol didn't even show up. She didn't contest. She didn't fight. She simply didn't come. By the end of summer, Matthew was granted full guardianship. The day we walked out of the courthouse, Lily clutched the official papers to her chest like a shield. Matthew bent down, his voice breaking as he whispered, "You're with us now. For good. No one can take that away." She buried her face in his chest, and for the first time I saw the Harris family, broken, battered, but finally healing. Not by erasing the past, but by choosing a different future. And as I watched them, I realized this wasn't just Matthew's redemption. It was Lily's chance at a new beginning, and my choice to stand with both of them in it. Months later, on a gray November morning, Matthew suggested something he hadn't dared in years. "I want to take you both to see Daniel." His voice was steady, but his hands twisted together as though even speaking the words cost him something. We drove toward Youngstown, the air sharp with the bite of early winter. The cemetery rested on a low hill, quiet and still, where brittle leaves clung stubbornly to bare branches. Matthew carried a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, his steps heavy as he led us to a modest headstone carved with his brother's name, Daniel Carter, beloved son and brother. He dropped to his knees, shoulders trembling. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of years. "I should have been here. I should have protected you." Tears traced down his face as he pressed his palm to the cold stone. I knelt beside him, wrapping my arms around his back. Lily stood close, silent but steady, her small hand gripping his shoulder. "You didn't fail him," I whispered. "You've carried that guilt too long." Daniel wouldn't want you to stay trapped in it. He'd want you to keep going, to protect Lily, to live the life you both dreamed of. Matthew's eyes closed. For years, his brother's death had been a chain around his neck. But with me and Lily at his side, I felt the weight begin to lift. The grief remained, it always would, but for the first time, it no longer defined him. Snow began to fall, soft, delicate flakes that blanketed the ground in silence, a hush that felt almost holy. I slipped my hand into Matthew's. Lily took the other, and together we stood before Daniel's grave, not as three broken people, but as a family stitched back together from loss. Matthew inhaled sharply, the cold burning his lungs, then let it out slowly. "I forgive myself," he whispered, quiet, fragile, real. We walked back to the car as the snow swirled around us, cloaking the earth in white. It was the start of winter, but for us it was also the start of something new. For me, the moment carried a truth I'll never forget. Love doesn't erase tragedy, but it reshapes it. It turns wounds into scars that no longer bleed, but tell a story of survival. And for Matthew, the truth was even simpler. Family isn't the chaos you're born into. It's the people who refuse to let go of you, no matter how heavy the past. As we drove away from Daniel's grave, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, covering the ground in white. It felt like the world was giving us a fresh page. But fresh pages don't stay blank forever. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of the story we were about to write together.